parties. That's live at 9:30 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 2. Now a debate between the candidates competing to be the next governor of Georgia. The Republican is businessman Guy Millner. The Democrat is State Representative Roy Barnes. It's about 50 minutes.
Good afternoon and welcome to this debate among the three candidates for governor of the state of Georgia. We have all three gentlemen in the studios this afternoon, and I will introduce them to you at this very moment. They are Republican Guy Millner, who ran for governor in 1994 and the U.S. Senate in 1996. Mr. Millner lives in Atlanta. He is the founder of the Norrell Corporation, a temporary services agency. Libertarian candidate Jack Cashin, a retired entrepreneur who founded the Cashin's restaurant chain. Mr. Cashin has made several bids for statewide office. Mr. Cashin lives in Cherokee County. And Democrat Roy Barnes, an attorney who has served in the Georgia legislature for more than 20 years. Mr. Barnes is from Cobb County, Mapleton, Georgia. Joining me this afternoon in questioning the candidates are our panelists, WSB-TV political reporter Bill Nygett and WSB Radio AM 750 Assistant News Director Condis Presley. The first round of questioning will come from the panelists. Later in this program, the candidates will have the chance to question each other. There will be time for rebuttal, rejoinders. We hope this will result in a wide-ranging discussion of issues of importance to all of us, you the voters, as you make your decision about whom you will vote for 1 week from Tuesday, Election Day. We will begin our debate with opening statements from each of the candidates. The order was determined prior to this telecast. We will start with Jack Cashin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jack Cashin. I'm the Libertarian candidate for governor. I think I am in this race to be the alternative to both the Republicans and the Democrats, who are very, very similar to each other. I'm married for 50 years to the same woman. As a matter of fact, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this weekend. I have 6 children, 11 grandchildren. I live on a farm. I've had up to 12,000 people as an employee of my restaurant chain. I've started a publishing business and am now a farmer up in Cherokee County. As libertarians, what we want to do is reduce government, stop the increase of government, and in that sense, we offer a very viable alternative to both the Republicans and the Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Cashin. Now the opening statement from Democrat Roy Barnes.
Georgia deserves a first-class education system, and I have 3 good reasons to be so strong in that effort. 3 children, all educated in the public schools of this state, Harlan, Allison, and Alyssa. And I want to make sure that when their children attend the public schools of this state, that they're even better than when they attended. We can do that by building on the progress that we've had under Zell Miller. We can do that by restoring discipline in the public school, by creation of alternative school programs. We can do that by having smaller class size. We can do that by having after-school programs. We can do that by restoring accountability to the public school system. I have the experience and the background, like Zell Miller, to bring about those changes in the public school system so that I can do for the public school system, K through 12, what Zell Miller has done for the university system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. And now the final opening statement from Republican candidate Guy Millner.
First, I want to thank you all for tuning in on a beautiful afternoon. And let me just say that this race, we really have quite a contrast. I have as my principal opponent a trial lawyer, a very worthy candidate, has been in the General Assembly for now 25 years. And I'm a business person. I believe that you, the independent voter, the voter who might today be undecided, you're sitting there and you're watching this program, and you're trying to decide which of us might best lead this state during the next 4 years. I hope you'll consider the fact that our education system continues to rank 47th, and who's best to give leadership. I hope that you'll consider the fact that Georgia is 7th highest in crime. Who's best able to deal with the murder activity in Atlanta, for example? And who's best able to get the waste out of state government and lower the tax burden on Georgia's citizens? I hope that you'll feel like that's a business person who understands how to get waste out of state government. Thank you for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Millner. And now we'll move to the panelists' Q&A part of this program. Our first question will come from WSB political reporter Bill Nygett.
Thanks, John. Mr. Millner, let me start with you, if you don't mind, sir. Recognizing that, that you don't run on a ticket with Lieutenant Gubernatorial candidate Mitch Skandalakis, nevertheless, he is a Republican. You would serve with him in the Capitol if you're both elected. Tell me your thoughts on the kind of campaign that he's running and whether you endorse Mr. Skandalakis' attempts to paint gays in a negative light. He seems to be suggesting that the city of Atlanta is poorly run and perhaps suggesting that that's racial to some extent. Would you accept and love to get the support of the gay community? Would you like to have the support of the black community? And how do you feel about the politics of race in the final weeks of this campaign?
Well, I certainly don't favor bringing race into the issue, Bill, and I'll say this for you. I'm real busy taking care of my own campaign. I've got a very, very tough opponent. I can't really be involved in someone else's campaign. I support Mitch's anti-tax policy. He's done a great deal to deal with property tax. We've got to get the tax burden down on folks, but I'm going to reach out to all of Georgia. I'm not interested in dividing our people. I'm interested in bringing people together. I built a company that today employs over 60,000 people. It takes a team person to do that. It's not a person who is autocratic or who tries to build up the differences on folks. Frankly, it's been a tough campaign. I've had all kinds of ads run against me, claiming all sorts of innuendos. I'm just going to try to stay focused on the issues. I'm going to reach out to the black community. It's very, very important. They're 30% of our population in this state. I was criticized this week, by the way, for having black supporters. I think it's important that you reach out to the whole state, and I'll continue to do that.
Would you repudiate then Mr. Skandalakis painting gays and perhaps blacks in a negative light?
I really can't comment on his campaign tactics. I can only tell you that I am so involved in my campaign that I can't be involved in others.
Any rejoinder or rebuttal comments?
Well, let me tell you, I have never seen such a negative campaign run as the one run by Mitch Skandalakis and Guy Millner. It's apparent that what happened a few weeks ago is that they both decided to play the race card. It was very obvious. It was very obvious in the first debate we had down in Perry. In fact, the headlines on the newspaper the next day was Millner deals race card in Perry debate. He did it very subtly, and just in case you missed it, they made sure that Mitch Skandalakis came along and did it very overtly, and it is dangerous. It is like throwing a hand grenade around with a pin out in a room. It will bring us economic ruin if it's allowed to continue.
Mr. Cashin.
Personally, I feel that the gays and lesbians have a place in our society, and they shouldn't be abused the way they are. I think they have a right to all the rights of citizenship. As far as the campaigning is concerned, I feel that the tenure of all of the television ads that I've seen have been negative. Relatively few positive ones. I haven't seen one. I must have missed it. I think that we're fortunate in one sense in that we have relatively little money to pay for the millions of dollars that it costs to be on a television ad. And as a result, even if I had the money, I don't think I would be negative. I would try to be positive. I think it's wrong.
Let's move to the next question now from Condace Presley.
Mr. Barnes, I'd like to start with you for my question. Both you and Mr. Millner have been criticized in some ways for how you might lead the state. Mr. Millner says he is a businessman who wants to bring a business approach to leading the state. You, sir, are a longtime legislator with extensive experience in state government. Is there such a thing as having too much experience and being too detail-oriented with respect to the operation of the state of Georgia and able to lead us into the next century?
Well, let me tell you, I think that I have really the best of both worlds. I do have extensive public service experience. Serving as a part-time legislator, and I have come to know the state in detail. I also have a business background. Mr. Millner likes to use stereotypes, of course, and claim that I'm a trial lawyer, and I am a lawyer. But I spend half my time, and I have spent for the last 20 years, in our family businesses that my brother and I run, and my father and his brother ran before him. So I have the best mixture of both worlds. The truth of the matter is this. We've had three good governors back-to-back that I've served under. George Busby, Joe Frank Harris, and Zell Miller. All of them had a common characteristic and trait that I have, and that is years of public service that understood the details of how to get something done. You have to have a basic knowledge of the state or you trip in economic development. That is what we cannot allow to happen in this state.
Mr. Millner, if I may, Candace, you do not have legislative experience. Senator Barnes raises this specter of someone coming into office who doesn't have any legislative experience, having to get up to speed, learn on the job. I mean, can you assure the people of Georgia that if you're elected, you will not have to have significant on-the-job training before you reach a comfort level with your duties?
I think the real issue is what kind of experience that you have. Roy said the other night in Albany that he's been working on education for 20 years. We're still 48th, 49th. When are we going to recognize that you're going to have to bring some leadership to these issues? We've got to reduce the class size. I want to reduce the class size by 20%, for example, in education. Roy doesn't have a plan to do that. He thinks it's a good idea. I believe it's leadership, John. I think it's taking ownership of the problem, recognizing K through 12 we're failing, and saying, here's where I'm going to give leadership to the issues. If it was legislative experience, we'd be running Tom Murphy for this job.
Do you feel entirely comfortable with your level of knowledge of the intricacies of Georgia state government, how to implement your program, how to work with the legislature?
I've spent a great deal of my time. I've met with all of our department heads. These are good folks. Frankly, the issue is not what the bill number is. The issue is not the definition of the mission of that committee in the House. The issue is it the right legislation? And bringing people together, Democrats and Republicans. We've got a big state. It's an important state. I think a leader quality is an important role as a governor. I think there are a lot of folks down there that know legislation.
Let me get Mr. Cashin's view on this before moving to Bill Nigut.
I think a leader should lead. And I think that from the standpoint of being in the trenches, so to speak, in the legislature, that's fine. But I think that from the standpoint of having attempted and succeeded in starting businesses and so forth, I think that takes an entrepreneurial spirit. And I think it's the question of what kind of judgment do you have from your successes and your failures. And I think that I've had plenty of successes and I've had plenty of failures. And I think that from that standpoint, I think I would be able to qualify to be a good governor.
Bill?
Ms. Barnes.
I'd like to, could I have a little rebuttal
Briefly.
to that? Yeah. Let me tell you something. I agree that business experience is important. That's the reason I have it. But you know, this idea, well, Roy Barnes has no idea about reducing class size. Guy, this is something we implemented and are working on it came about 15 years ago, reducing class size in the first 3 grades. You continue to use nothing but deception and lies and misinformation in trying to explain things. This is time to quit calling each other names, quit calling trial lawyers, quit using stereotypes, and let's solve the problems of this state.
Mr. Millner, briefly, a rebuttal.
I'm not calling anyone names. I'm trying to have a good time this afternoon. But let me just say, you're saying we've been working on reducing class size for 15 years. I believe is what Roy said. We've got to get about the job. That teacher down in Albany, Georgia, 28 third graders. She says, I'm quitting education. I can't handle 28 third graders. I'm not going to spend another 15 years working on the problem. I'm going to find those teachers. We're going to get the waste out of government, and we're going to get this education kicked into high gear.
Let's move to the next question now. Bill Nigut.
Ms. Barnes, let me turn to you. Members of your campaign staff were pretty boastful this past week about the fact that you were having a big fundraiser down at the Georgia Railway Depot. You raised $1 million+ apparently. And although we haven't seen the latest financial disclosure reports, which are due tomorrow, my guess is you've raised well over $5 million at this point for your campaign. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have at the same time criticized Mr. Millner at times because he's put so much of his own money into the race. But shouldn't the citizens of this state wonder about boasting, about raising so much money without knowing, we don't know who that money comes from? Where are you getting your money from?
Sure.
And what's wrong with going ahead and writing a check yourself? At least the people know where Mr. Millner's money comes from.
Well, and let me tell you something. I believe in full disclosure, and we disclose every contribution, even those under $100. We have somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 contributors. In fact, most of the money have come from small contributors, small to moderate contributors. Yes, we've had to raise money, and we will make ours available, and have made ours available. And maybe Mr. Millner could tomorrow, instead of mailing on Friday, Maybe he could make his available. Here's the problem. I believe that you will see at the end of this campaign that over the last 4 years, Mr. Millner will have spent close to $40 million of his own money trying to be elected to a high political office in this state. The truth of the matter is this. You have to have a base of support. Instead of just writing a check, a $5 million check to your campaign every once in a while, and running attack media that started 2 days after a primary, that you have to articulate the basis of your support.
But I'd like to maintain the focus, if I can, on you.
You may.
Obviously, you disclose. I didn't mean to suggest you don't.
Absolutely.
But you do have to take money from powerful interest groups, from law firms, from other people dealing with the state of Georgia. This is an extraordinarily expensive campaign. Why shouldn't citizens wonder whether that money comes with a price tag of its own?
Well, let me tell you something. The truth of the matter is we have a broad base of support. And I think you will see, in fact, the latest disclosure report, I was just reading it, getting it ready for tomorrow, is over 400 pages just for this reporting time. The question is, do you have a broad base of support from all over the state? And we do, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it because it's allowed us to get a message out.
Mr. Millner, did you have a response to this?
I have over 14,000 contributors to our campaign. But I'll say this to the folks here at WSB, if the rates were less, we wouldn't have, I mean, none of us would have to raise the kind of money that we have to raise. I do have an advantage. A former governor shared with me that I had the advantage of starting with a clean piece of paper. I have no obligations, got no special interest groups supporting Guy Millner. They're all on his side, and that's okay. But I like that advantage, and I think that I'll serve this state as a better governor as a result of that.
Mr. Cashin, I can say you have a low-budget campaign, to be sure, and how's it going?
Well, I think we have something like $1,500 in the pot at this particular point in time, and that's fine. I don't mind that at all because it means that I'm not beholden to anybody. Money corrupts, and if you gave me $1 and somebody else gave me $100, and you were the first to call and the other $100 was the last to call in the day, who do you think I'm going to call back? The guy that gave me the most money. This is the way politics works. I think politics is corrupted, and the whole concept of politics has been corrupted by money. And I think we should have an entirely different system of campaign finance. And it's long due, but I don't think we're going to be able to get the legislators to change the rules because they're the foxes that are in the henhouse.
Do the two of you support significant campaign reform?
I do. I think that you should. The only thing that you cannot reform that should be is how much money you put in of your own money. The Supreme Court's rules, you can put in as much money as you want to because it's a matter of expression. But I do favor reform. I think that we ought to disclose all sources of soft money. I think we ought to disclose even more and more frequently. And in fact, in the last 14 days, and I had a bill last session that just didn't have time to get through, but said in the last 14 days you ought to have to disclose every day a contribution over a certain amount.
Brief response from you gentlemen. Campaign reform, favorite?
I favor it. I'll share this with you. When a major state department sends out a memorandum saying support Barnes because you'll get a pay raise, when I'm running against what essentially is 129 years of tradition of Democratic Party, we're trying to take the beach. I mean, this is a campaign going against a Democratic monopoly that's been in our state for a long time. Zell Miller's done a good job. I want to build on what he's done, but we've got to bring competition to the process. We've got to have an education system that works for our young people. Roy's been working on education for a long time. I mean, he's been working on it for a long time. Nothing's happening. I want to challenge that teachers union. I want to challenge the idea of tenure for teachers K through 12.
We'll come back to education later. We've got to move on. Mr. Cashin, just a brief period on this.
Well, I agree we need a change. I think that we need a change from both the Republicans and the Democrats because, in my opinion, what the Democrats and the Republicans want to do is increase government, and what we want to do is stop the increase and make the government practical, make it leaner, and then when we reduce the expenditures that the government has been spending of our money for so long, then we can cut the taxes.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Welcome back. We're now at the point of our debate where the candidates get to ask each other a question, and we will begin left to right. The first question for each of his two opponents is Guy Millner. Mr. Millner.
Roy Barnes, I'd like to ask you this question. It's a multiple choice question, and it says essentially there are 3 votes that you voted on while serving in the General Assembly. Which of these 3 do you believe that you regret the most? The against the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday, the vote to allow convicted drug dealers to be freed on bail, and the vote in 1989 against the lottery for education.
Guy, I've said many times that I regret the vote on Martin Luther King's birthday. Of course, the bill that you talk about on bail for drug dealers, you know is a lie. You know it's a deception, and in fact you continue to try to perpetrate it. What the bill said was that there would be no hearing for any type of bail on convicted persons of all felonies. When the bill came up and it said that as long as there was a hearing given, then I voted for the bill. The first bill, the bail bill, you know, was defeated and Republicans voted against it. On the bill regarding the lottery, Guy, you said in this very studio 4 years ago when you were castigating Zell Miller, who you now praise, and saying the same things against Zell Miller that you said against me, that you were against the lottery, that you wanted to vote every 5 years on the lottery, and that you thought it was a scam and that Hope scholarships were a false hope. Now, you know I voted against the lottery in 1989. You said you voted against it in 1992. I'm in favor of the Hope scholarships and always have been.
Brief rebuttal, Mr. Millner.
Well, my vote was in the ballot box and your vote was in the Georgia Senate.
Next question, please.
This is a vote to Jack Cashin. I have a question.
Check.
Question for Jack Cashin. I have suggested that the Atlanta airport be set aside into a separate independent authority to take it out of city politics. My opponent, Roy Barnes, disagrees with that, opposes that. Do you have a position on it, and could you explain why?
My feeling about the administration of the city of Atlanta is that it's mismanaged. I don't think it's managed properly. I don't think the people who are in power in Atlanta have the qualities that are necessary to run the airport the way it should be run. It's possible that without purchasing it, if somehow an authority could be established that would not be subject to political whims of Atlanta, I think that might be better for the state of Georgia.
Satisfied with that answer, Mr. Millner?
Yes, I am.
Let's move to the next round of questions from Jack Cashin.
Okay, start out with Roy.
Okay.
Roy, I'm planning to give an educational tax credit to all of the parents who send their children to private schools and to homeschools. I think that what this would do would relieve them of some of the pressures that they have by not only paying their taxes to help the other schools, but also to pay their own expenses for homeschooling. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I believe that homeschooling is a viable alternative for those parents who want to homeschool their children. In fact, I wrote the legislation right now that currently allows that. I also believe that parents should have the right to send their children to private schools, but I do not believe that there should be a financial incentive. The public schools are the primary responsibility of us all, and we have to make sure that they're improved, but they're kept vibrant, and I do not believe that that would help to improve them or keep them vibrant.
Mr. Cashin, your rebuttal or next question?
Well, my feeling is that they do have a viability to them, and if a person wants the freedom to send his child to a public school or to a government school or to a private school, that's up to them. But when they do it, they are relieving us $6,000 per student each year on the public school rolls. And therefore, I think they, and I believe they deserve as much credit as they can possibly get.
Your question now for Mr. Millner.
Guy, I am proposing that we eliminate the corporate income tax. And what that would do, in my estimation, is make us far more competitive with the other southeastern states that are vying for industry to come in. I think it will reduce costs. I think it will create jobs. And I wanted to get your feeling. How do you feel about it?
Well, let me say that I want to eliminate the ad valorem tax on cars. I want to reduce property taxes by up to $500, and we get that money by getting waste out of state government. Next, I've said that let's start reducing the state income tax. And then if you want to start working on corporate tax, that would be fine. I believe folks are taxed up to here, and I want to cut every single tax that we can to the bone. But in the few seconds I've got, I want to talk about homeschooling, your earlier question. We've got 80,000 youngsters in our state that homeschool. That is 80,000 parents that have said that the education system in our state is failing. Roy is not in favor of vouchers. It's competition to the public schools. I believe that we've got to have more charter schools. We've got to have voucher opportunity, and I want to encourage those 80,000 homeschoolers. It's a shame that they've got to pay taxes and then can't send their kids to a public school because the school system's failing them.
All right.
I'm against vouchers because when you have a voucher, the government is giving you the voucher. You take it to a private school, and then if all of a sudden you have enough children in a private school that are receiving vouchers from the government all of a sudden is going to say, hey, we control you. Money talks, money controls, and I don't want the federal government to do that. Charter schools, that's fine. Homeschooling, that's fine. Privatization, that's fine, but no vouchers.
Let's move to the next round of questions now. Candidate Roy Barnes.
Guy, what is the state revenue estimate? Who sets it, and what changes would you make in the way it's set?
Well, the revenue estimate is set by the budget director along with Hank Thomason, who is the advisor in terms of state revenue projections. The projections for this year, by the way, is that the state will have roughly about $600 million more in receipts than we had planned. Our state has been growing at the rate of about 6.5% a year for the last 10 years. In a budget that I suggested where we could get 7% of waste out of state government, the forecast for this coming fiscal year, I've suggested that it's a 4% increase. I'm not using a 5 or a 6. I try to be very, very conservative in that forecast. I will say this, Georgia, I think, continues to show every indication that we can continue to grow. I don't believe that we're going to be impacted with the recessions that you have in other parts of the country. I think we'll continue to show. Don Radichak, the economist at Georgia State, is a very, very good source. I've had several conversations with him. We're going to fall back a little bit, but I believe Georgia's going to continue to go forward.
Mr. Barnes, any rebuttal?
Well, Guy, you're wrong. The state revenue estimate is set by the governor. The governor sets the state revenue estimate, and he has to transmit it to the General Assembly within the first 10 days of the session. Now, the reason it's so important is because the General Assembly is prohibited from spending or appropriating more money than is set by the governor. It's not set by any of the budget office, OPB, or legislative budget office. It is the sole and exclusive responsibility of the governor.
All right, Mr. Barnes, your question for Mr. Cashin.
Jack, tell me what the position of the Libertarian Party is on the legalization of drugs.
There are people who are suffering from incurable illnesses. They are suffering very badly, and it has been proven marijuana alleviates their pain. And what I am for is the legalizing of marijuana for medically people who are in medical difficulty.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. We're going to take another brief pause to regroup, and when we come back, we will resume the questions from the panel, so we hope you'll stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to our debate among the three candidates for governor of Georgia. We're going to resume questions from the panel now. First question from Condace Presley.
Mr. Millner, I'd like to start with you just to follow up actually on the question that Mr. Barnes asked just before the break. If, sir, you don't know that it's the governor's responsibility to set the revenue estimate for the state, how can you assure Georgia voters that even with your business background, that the experience you would bring to a Millner administration won't lead to governmental gridlock for Georgia?
Well, Ms. Presley, thank you because I was going to try to get an answer, and I appreciate you bringing that back up. Roy Barnes is mistaken. The governor of this state will get input from Tim Burgess. He heads up the Office of Budget. Tim Burgess will advise the governor what that number might be. I hope that there's no governor that, independent of anybody else, sits down in a dark room and decides what that number is going to be. I'm a person that's built a major enterprise, and I can promise you, you need smart people around you. Talk to Hank Huckabee, for example, over University of Georgia, the former budget director. He'll tell you it's the budget department that helps with that forecast information. It's critically important. It not be a one-man show. As governor of this state, we are 152,000 employees. We are a $13 billion budget. In fact, if Georgia was a separate country, we would be the 35th largest country in the world. You can't have a one-person show. You've got to get input from others.
Well, I don't think that he meant that you were going to pull a number out of the hat. I think obviously we understand that there would have to be some consultation with staffers. But again, I think the question goes to your degree of experience in governance and able to lead the state and knowing, and if as you said earlier also, that relationships, you talked about relationships being critical and being able to get things done in state government. I'm curious to know what relationships have you already established with the people who are in state government now so that a Millner administration, for example, would again be able to accomplish goals that you've set?
I've spent a great deal of time visiting my department heads, and we've got some good folks out there. But let me get back to your point, because it really is important. This is not something that one person is going to decide. I'm clearly aware that the governor ultimately, finally, has to make that decision. But it's with a great deal of input. What you have here is you have a very worthy opponent. Roy's a nice person. He's been in the General Assembly. He can tell you every bill number line by line, and I applaud that. In fact, if I wanted a legislator to get something through, I'd probably go to Roy Barnes because he's very, very experienced. But is that what is needed to deal, for example, with the increase in the budget? You raised the question of the budget. The Cato Institute rated Georgia a C on tax and spend policies. They rate us an F on education and an F in terms of being high on crime. I want to get leadership to those kinds of issues across our state. And I'll bring a good team together, and we're going to have some good folks that are in Zell Miller's administration that's going to help me get the job done.
Mr. Barnes.
Yes, let me tell you something. The question, Guy, was not who you get input was, who sets the budget estimate. I've sat there and listened to governors get conflicting advice, and they will have a broad range of advice, and the governor, the buck stops there. And Guy, you're even wrong about how many state employees we have. We don't have 152 state employees. We have about 93. In fact, there has been a net decrease in the number of state employees of about 400 over the last 4 years. The truth of the matter is you run every election the same way. You ran it against Zell Miller. You called him a politician. You called him that you needed somebody with legislative experience. And it is experience in running the state that makes us prosperous.
Mr. Cashin, any response to this?
Yes, if I'm elected governor, I'm going to ask Roy Barnes to be my lobbyist in the legislature. I think that one of the things that we have to be careful about is that a leader must lead. And the important thing is, do you have the experience in leadership and entrepreneurs and starting businesses and also being a professional politician, if you will, and many of them are lawyers. But I think that the important thing is to take the best of both parties. If I'm elected, obviously, as a libertarian, I would take guys like Steve Langford, and I would take Johnny Isaacson's and bring them into the government to help me run it.
Let's talk about cutting taxes, because Mr. Barnes and Mr. Millner, I know you both have platforms for doing that.
We do.
In fact, each of your proposals would, in fact, deprive counties of revenue they now depend on. Mr. Barnes, you would increase the homestead exemption, something your opponent seems to think is not
wrong.
what...
I mean,
well,
he's
we'll get into that.
ad saying that I'm in favor of increasing property exemptions, of course, trying to fool the people.
Yeah, I thought you might get around to that. Mr. Millner, you also want to get rid of the car tag tax, and that would take a lot of revenue away from counties, and the county officials are concerned about this. You say you'll reimburse them from state coffers, but what if the state hits a recession? You say it won't happen, but it could happen. County officials are afraid if that happens, that reimbursement money doesn't come from the state. They have to turn around and hike property taxes on their constituents. How do you respond to that fear?
You start asking
I'll start with
okay.
you, yes.
the reason that I've stayed away from the car tax is for 2 or 3 reasons. I mean, everybody wants to do away with car tax, but what you do is you exempt the Mercedes-Benz along with the Ford when you take all the car tax off. My proposal says you take the first $50,000 of value of a home or family farm, and there's no tax on that. Now, basically, all that does is index what is the homestead exemption, which has not been done since 1941. But here's the difference. You see, the state of Georgia, those school teachers are a county employee, a district employee. The state of Georgia supplies at least 60% of all the funding for the school system. And so through particularly the reimbursement on the school system, you can make up lost revenue without impacting the county local government. That's the reason I've said that this plan will take up to 7 to 8 years. We have been doing this. We have been giving tax relief. In fact, there's been $855 million in tax cuts in the last 4 years, and it fits into that overall amount of tax relief.
All right, and Mr. Millner, your plan to eliminate the car tag tax, you want to do that in 1 year. I mean, and what if the state revenues take a downturn? What happens to those county officials who are depending on that state reimbursement and the money's not there?
Well, the first place is going to take the General Assembly to put it into place, and then we're going to have to find a way to embed it. I share with every one of our county chairmen, and I've met with a ton of our county managers and county chairmen. We'll find a way that they're very comfortable. They're guaranteed, Ms. Presley, that that money will be there and that the state's not going to take. But let me share this with you, because all across this state, I haven't found one county that said they're going to give that car tax money back. And Roy says that everybody wants to do away with the car tax. And I'm glad you say that, because I agree with you. Everybody hates that tax. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to find a way to embed it. This state's got a $13 billion budget. Better for the state government to get waste out at that size, and I'm only suggesting 7 cents out of every dollar, than for the counties to be asked to do that. And we'll find a way to guarantee to the counties that they won't miss a dollar.
Mr. Cashin, what are your tax cutting proposals? And what will the impact be on?
The corporate income tax I'd like to reduce to make us more competitive in the Southeast. I think we have a lot of geriatrics, a lot of people out there over 62 that need property tax relief. So, I beg your pardon, not property tax relief, they need school tax relief. In my county, Cherokee County, we have 78% of the property taxes going to the school board. And we have a lot of people in Cherokee County, and I'm sure in other counties, that are in serious financial trouble when the taxes keep increasing and their income doesn't increase. In effect, it's decreasing. So all of a sudden they're stuck with a house that they can't afford, even though they paid for it, but the taxes keep increasing. And what happens? They have to sell their house, and then they have to live with their children, which is not a bad idea, I guess. But I think it's important to understand the vagaries of the tax system, and we can't impose that kind of tax on and on and on the elderly because they can't afford it.
Okay, let's, Mr. Barnes, you have a brief...
Well, the only thing I want to follow up to what Guy says, in addition to the cuts he's talking about, he is proposing $18 billion in new spending. If you total up everything he's proposed, it's $18 billion. And in those 4 years that he'll implement that $18 billion of new spending, there'll only be $5 billion of increased revenue from growth if we continue to grow at the same rate. So he is putting forth a $13 billion in new spending. It's because of his lack of experience. He doesn't understand these things actually cost money. And our budget's only $13 billion.
Well, let's see if Mr. Millner can make the math work.
Well, the math doesn't work. In fact, I hope Roy sticks to lawyering and doesn't become an economist, because he's so far off. Number one, over the next 4 years, this state will collect $53 billion in taxes. $53 billion over the next 4 years. I've suggested that we can find $800 million in waste. That is less than 2%. You talk to your viewers out here, they'll tell you there's a ton of waste in government. I'm committed to finding those teachers. Roy keeps saying we can't, we can't, we can't. I'm a can-do person. I want to find those teachers and reduce that class size. I want to eliminate the burden on the taxpayer, and we'll find the money for the ad valorem tax.
Let's move on to the next question now.
Well,
I think you made your point.
Thank you.
Rebutted it well. So, Bill?
Well, I want to talk about education, if I can. And if you don't mind, I'd like to pose sort of two questions at one time, starting with you, Mr. Barnes.
All right.
You have talked a lot lately, you did earlier in this program, about becoming the inheritor of a legacy started by George Busbee, Joe Frank Harris, Zell Miller. Each of those governors had educational programs.
Absolutely.
Zell Miller's clearly become one of the most popular governors ever in this state, but on the basis of things like Hope Scholarship and pre-K. Wonderful programs, but not directed specifically at how we really improve education in our classrooms. Now, the question becomes, why are we still doing so poorly when we compare ourselves to the rest of the nation, and what can you offer the viewers today that will help them grasp some concept that you think will really make us better? And Mr. Millner, your answer, 7,500 new teachers, among other things, there are folks out there who think you're going to have trouble raising the money to do that. So if you had to take that off the table, then what do you do? If I could ask each of you to respond.
Well, let me start off this way. First, we're going to need 7,500 teachers over the next 4 years just to keep up with where we are. So you're talking about hiring 15,000 more, and we have a plan now. The problem that you have is you have somebody that comes in that's inexperienced and knows nothing about the history of what's going on and says, we're going to start this brand new program. Instead of finishing out what we're on, Johnny Isaacson, who I trust in education, tells me, and I am convinced of it, that yes, we've got some improvements to make in education. Reducing the class size in the first 3 years, which we are doing, by the way. That number at 28 used to be 35. We will be down to 20 in the first 3 grades, which is where the study shows that it needs to be. We have to restore discipline to the classroom. You cannot have a learning environment unless you fund alternative schools and alternative programs. And you have to expand and fund after-school programs. Those are what are proven to improve education. I have 3 children. They went to the public school system. They learned. I did also. I want to make it better for their children and just not have a catchy political phrase that gets lost after the election.
Well, I don't think the Zell teaching scholarships is a catchy political phrase. I've suggested this past week that we have 1,000 teaching scholarship offered this year. Use the tobacco settlement money. It's a good reason, it's a good place to put the money. Offer a full-bore scholarship, complete, room and board and everything. We've got an effort towards that now under the Hope Promise program, but it comes nowhere close to giving that youngster a full scholarship. I want us to get the best and the brightest. John, I'm in this business of politics primarily for the issue of education. It's the burning passion that I have, and I'm not willing to say we can't do it. And I don't... here's Millner, who doesn't have a history of knowing all the problems of trying to do it. Yes, I'm Pollyanna. I agree with that. I'm going to set real high standards. I'm going to set real high goals. I'm going to try to take this state and do everything we can to encourage our people to reach that highest mark, because those kids, those 28 kids in that 3rd grade class, we got to protect the public schools. Those kids deserve a chance.
Mr. Cashin, did you
I think we have to develop a system of rewarding the good teachers and weeding out the bad teachers. I think we have a problem. It puzzles me a great deal why we're throwing all this money and nothing is coming back. Why are we still so low? I think it comes back to, in large measure, in mediocrity in the teaching profession and the lack of discipline and home relationships with the families. My father and mother raised me. They fed me, clothed me, sheltered me, educated me, disciplined me, and it was their responsibility. I feel the same way. I think too many people are abdicating their responsibilities and not supporting the teachers. Today, a teacher can be sued by a parent for looking cross-eyed at little Johnny or Jane. And I think we have to protect them, and we have to reward the teachers who are good teachers, keep them, and get the other ones that are just there to put in their time out.
I want to try to get in one more question before we take a pause before closing statements. Candace.
University of Georgia uses a number of factors when considering whether or not it's going to admit a marginal student. Legacy, did mom or dad go to school, or a brother or sister go to school? Athletic ability, can you play on the football team, basketball team, whatever. Also, whether or not there's certain leadership ability. But there's another criteria that the university uses to determine whether or not kids can come in, and that one would be race, and whether or not it would bring diversity to have people of different cultures on the campus. Mr. Millner, if I could start with you. You, in fact, in new ads that I've seen on TV just recently, are opposed to that criteria. Why is it okay for legacy and athletic ability and other criteria to be okay when considering whether or not to let a marginal student into the University of Georgia, but race is not?
And let me caution you to keep your answers brief so we can have all three answer this.
I think diversity is very important in all areas. I have 6 outside members of my board of directors. 2 of those 6 are women. One of those 2 women is an African American. More than half of my managers are females. I believe in diversity. I believe in encouraging, but I don't think it should be done at the price of not encouraging merit. I don't believe that minorities have a disadvantage if we give them a good, solid K through 12 education. If we do the job up front, you're not going to have an issue with the number of folks getting into the University of Georgia. But what is happening is we're failing our young people, and especially in our lower performing schools, which oftentimes are minority schools.
Let's move to Jack Cashin for a response.
It's my understanding that we do have, in part of the mechanism of education, admittance to schools of higher education, and one of those factors is race. Economic diversification, geographic diversification. I think it's there. I think the mechanism is there, and I don't, to my knowledge, isn't off the books yet. So it's there, and I don't quite understand what the problem is.
Roy Barnes, you get the last shot on this.
Neither do I. Let me tell you something. I don't believe in quotas. I don't believe in set-asides, and I've never voted against them, Guy, so you can correct another one of your ads on television. But I do believe in fairness. I believe in equal pay for equal work for women and for all people. And I believe that the University of Georgia should truly represent the state. When I was at the law school 30 years ago, there were only 5 women in my law school class. Now my daughter's over there, and there are 46 women in her law school, 46% in her law school class. I am not going to tell her that she's got to go back home and become a secretary of somebody else, that she's some type of second-class citizen.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We're going to take a brief pause. When we return, we'll have closing statements from the candidates. Time now for closing statements from the candidates. The order of appearance was determined by a drawing. The first closing statement from Libertarian candidate Jack Cashin.
The Libertarian Party was started in 1971 by disgruntled Republicans and unhappy Democrats. We're 27 years old, and we're the fastest growing political party in the United States. I have tried not to insult your intelligence by my answers. I think that the Libertarian Party represents the party of protecting the taxpayer, not protecting the tax spenders. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are both for increasing government. They say they want to decrease the increase. What we want to do is stop the growth of government. Teddy Roosevelt said, "Far better it is to dare mighty things, even though checkered by failure, than to live in that gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat." I suggest you take a dare this time. Don't waste your vote for the same old, but vote for the Libertarian this time so that you really will have a change. Excuse me, a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cashin. Next closing statement from Republican Guy Millner.
I want to thank you for tuning in. And let me just say, this is a little bit like addressing a jury. You're the jury. My Democratic opponent has a great deal of experience as a lawyer in addressing the juries. You're asked this question: who is best equipped to deal with the K through 12 education system? Is it the same folks that have been there? Roy's been there for 25 years. I want to boost the K through 12 education system. I want it working for our youngsters. Who's best to deal with crime? I want to end parole. He's opposed to that. When I see these 6 murders in Atlanta in the last week, I get concerned about crime and the image in Georgia and what it does to tourism in our state. And frankly, you have to decide tonight and today who's the best person to get waste out of government. Conduct that independent audit of state government. Help reorganize state government and lower the taxes for the Georgia citizens. I hope you'll say, let's give a business person a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy Millner. Now the final closing statement from Democrat Roy Barnes.
Really, this race comes down to who do you trust to tell the truth? Who do you trust with the future of the state? Over the last few weeks, Guy Millner has used innuendo, stereotype, and outright lies against me. Says I voted against Hope scholarships and I wasn't even in the legislature. Says I'm in favor of quotas when he knows that was not true. Says that I am in favor of increasing your property tax exemption, trying to confuse you that I might be in favor of increasing your property tax. We know who Zell Miller trusts. Zell Miller trusts me. He said so. He trusts me to make sure that Hope scholarships continue. He trusts me to make sure that pre-K continues. He trusts me to improve the educational system of K through 12. We cannot elect someone who will say anything or do anything just for a political office. You have to have the experience. You have to have the background. You have to have the knowledge to make sure that Georgia remains on a prosperous path. I have that knowledge, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here to share your views with the voting public on this gubernatorial campaign. My thanks to the panelists who've aided in the questioning, Bill Nigut and Condace Presley, and thank you for tuning in to watch. We hope you have gained some valuable information that will help you in making your decision when you go to the polls on November 3rd. That's 1 week from Tuesday. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Good afternoon.
For more on the races happening around the country, you can access our website. We have candidate profiles, local